So today we're unpacking a pretty incredible story. It's about how an entire nation was basically forced to build its own eyes in the sky. How India went from being completely in the dark to becoming a real contender in a new and very high-stakes space race.
When you hear a line like that, it sounds like the start of a folktale, right? But believe it or not, that single sentence is the real starting point for one of the biggest military and technological shifts of the 21st century. It's just a wild beginning to a story about war, humiliation, and incredible ambition.
And that right there is the central mystery we're going to dig into. I mean, India had satellites that could literally photograph American bombing runs over Baghdad. So how on earth did they miss thousands of soldiers digging in on their own home turf? That question, it exposes this massive vulnerability, a blindness that would completely change the course of the nation's future. Okay, so let's get into it. The story really kicks off back in 1999 with a conflict that became a defining moment for modern India, the Kargil War. And it didn't start with a bang, but with a quiet, and honestly, pretty shocking discovery. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The first line of defense wasn't some billion-dollar satellite network or a sophisticated radar system. It was a shepherd. A guy named Tashi Namgyel was just out looking for his animals when he stumbled on armed men in Pakistani uniforms literally digging bunkers. The country was completely blind to an invasion happening right under its nose. And this blindness, well, it led to a cascade of humiliations. First off, with no real spy satellites, India had to dust off these ancient 1960s-era jets just to see what was going on. Then, they asked the United States for access to GPS data to help target enemy positions, and the US said no. And to top it all off, international pressure basically kneecapped the rocket engine program, setting them back 15 years. So you've got no eyes, no navigation, and no independence. This was absolute rock bottom. But sometimes hitting rock bottom is exactly what you need. That humiliation lit a fire. It created this powerful national resolve. India would never be blind again. They decided they were going to build everything themselves, the capacity to see, to navigate, and to operate in space all on their own terms. Because here's the thing about space. If you really want to control your own destiny up there, it's not enough to just have satellites. You've got to be able to protect them. And that's where we get into ASATs, or anti-satellite weapons. Possessing one of these is like holding a trump card. It proves you can not only use space, but you can also deny it to your adversaries. Now, what's really fascinating here is the contrast. In 2007, China conducted an ASAT test that was, well, incredibly reckless. They hit a satellite way up at 865 kilometers, creating a massive field of space junk that is still a threat to everyone today. India waited 12 years, and when it did its own test, Mission Shakti, it was a masterpiece of precision. They hit a target at a much lower orbit, ensuring all the debris would just burn up in the atmosphere. It was a message. We have this power, and we know how to use it responsibly. And this speed was just astonishing. From the moment of launch to the missile hitting its target, the entire Mission Shakti operation took just 168 seconds. That's less than 3 minutes to join this very elite club of nations with a proven anti-satellite weapon. It was a crystal clear signal that the humiliations of the past were over. But look, having a weapon is one thing. Knowing how to outthink your opponent, that's a whole different ballgame. So now we're going to shift gears a bit, moving from history to a simulated engagement called Operation Sindoor. This shows how India could use clever tactics to counter a much larger force. This is where strategy meets capability. First, just look at the battlefield. In this scenario, India is massively outmatched. China has nearly 10 times the number of military satellites in orbit. It's a classic David versus Goliath setup. On paper, there's just no way India can hide from that many eyes in the sky. So how do you fight an enemy who can see everywhere? You make them doubt what they're seeing. It was brilliant, really. India knew the exact orbital path of every single Chinese satellite, so just before a satellite was due to pass overhead, they would move their critical S-400 missile defense batteries and replace them with giant inflatable decoys that looked identical on radar. A fantastic deception. And the result of this? It was stunning. China fed its satellite data to Pakistan, which then launched missiles at what they thought were high-value targets. They ended up hitting empty ground and a bunch of inflatable toys. Meanwhile, the real S-400s shot down 13 Pakistani aircraft without a single loss. It was a masterclass in deception, proving that clever tactics can, at least for a while, beat superior technology. But winning one battle doesn't win the war.
And the threat from China wasn't just about the number of satellites anymore. It was evolving into something far more sophisticated and, frankly, far more dangerous. The game was changing again.
This is the new threat. Forget exploding missiles. China demonstrated it could use one satellite to basically grab another satellite and just tow it away into a useless orbit. No explosion, no debris, no definitive proof of an attack. It's the perfect stealth weapon, a way to disable a country's entire communications or surveillance network with complete deniability. And it doesn't stop there. China is building this whole multi-layered arsenal, ground-based lasers that can blind satellites, and those robotic arms to physically disable them. They've even given Pakistan access to their Baidu navigation system, the very same system found on untraceable militants in Kashmir. This is a full-spectrum assault on space dominance. So this brings us to today. The clever tactics of Operation Sindoor were brilliant, sure, but you can't run a nation's defense on improvisation forever. India is now in a desperate race against the clock to close this massive technological gap. And just look at these numbers. India's plan for 52 new military satellites is ambitious, but China is planning to launch over 300. The spending gap is even more stark. The entire budget for India's 5-year plan is about what the U.S. Space Force spends in 6 weeks. The scale of the challenge is just immense. And here's the kicker. The very navigation system, NavIC, that was born from the humiliation of being denied GPS back in 1999, it's currently failing. Its atomic clocks keep dying. In a cruel twist of irony, India's military is back to relying on American GPS. That old vulnerability has come right back. But India is fighting back. It's developing missile warning systems, laser weapons, and even its own satellites with robotic arms to counter that co-orbital threat. And while it might all sound like science fiction, this technology is already moving into the testing phase. So where does all this lead? Well, it leads right back to the core challenge for a nation that was once blind: how to see clearly in a world where your rivals can see even more. This quote really captures the entire journey. Every single setback, every humiliation has been followed by a period of quiet, determined building that ultimately leads to a new capability. The denial of GPS led to NavIC. The shock of Kargil led to spy satellites. China's ASAT test led to Mission Shakti. It's this amazing cycle of resilience.
You know, the founder of India's space program, Vikram Sarabhai, had this beautiful, peaceful vision to use space to help farmers and connect school children. That vision hasn't been betrayed, but it has been forced to evolve. The new reality is that you can't serve the farmer if you can't defend the satellite that forecasts his monsoon. Defense has become the prerequisite for development.
So India is no longer blind. It is building its unblinking eye in the sky, piece by piece, driven by the memory of past failures. But its adversaries are building faster. And the question remains, can this giant learn to see clearly enough and quickly enough to prevent the next war? That is the race against time that defines the new battleground of space.